Hey there, today we're going to take a look at an example of factoring, and specifically we're going to be looking at an example where our trinomial will factor into two of the same binomials, meaning that our two parentheses are going to end up being exactly the same, and we can write it as a parentheses squared. So let's take a look at the example here with f of x equals x squared minus 6x plus 9. Now, since a equals 1, there is a shortcut here, but we'll talk about that towards the end. So normally when we're factoring this out, we want to multiply a times by c, and we see here that there's no number in front of x squared, so that counts as a equals 1. So I'm going to do 1 times by 9 off on the side in order to get 9. So I'm going to find my factors of 9. So that's 1 and 9 and 3 and 3. And we want the pair of factors that adds to what we have in the middle here. Now we see that we have a -6 in the middle of our equation for b, but we only have a pair of factors that adds to +6. So if that is the case, then you want to flip the signs for both of your numbers. So +3 will turn to -3, +3 will turn to -3. Because -3 times by -3 is still +9, but -3 plus -3 will now be -6. So that means I'm going to take this -6 and split it into -3x minus 3x. My x squared will stay the same, and my plus 9 will also stay the same. I'm also going to set the left side equal to 0. So now if we follow our steps for factoring, we want to group up our first two terms in parentheses. I want to make sure there's a plus sign in between the two parentheses, and we'll have our second two terms in the second parentheses. But all of our numbers and variables are going to stay the same for right now. So x squared minus 3x, and then -3x plus 9. Now for each parentheses, we want to find our greatest common factor. In the first parentheses, I'm going to divide by +1x or just +x. In the second parentheses, I'm going to divide by -3 because I see that 3 will divide both 3 and 9. And since the first term here is negative, we want to make sure that we divide by a negative number, like so. We're going to put these greatest common factors in front of both of the parentheses. So x goes in front of the first parentheses, -3 goes in front of the second parentheses. And then we divide for what goes inside. So x squared divided by x gives us x. -3x divided by x is -3. -3x divided by -3 is now 1x or just x. And then +9 divided by -3 is -3. So now we're ready to write out our two parentheses here. And what we see is that the two parentheses are actually the same. Our first parentheses comes from the part that we have here. It's the same, x minus 3. And the second parentheses comes from our two greatest common factors. In this case, we have x and then -3. So both parentheses for our final answer would be exactly the same. However, there is one way of simplifying this a little bit further, and that is if we have the same parentheses times itself, we can then write it as that parentheses squared. So for instance, I can rewrite this as x minus 3 squared. like so, because there are two of the same parentheses right here. So you can simplify it a little bit further by writing it in this format right here. And I mentioned at the beginning that there was a shortcut. Anytime that there's a equals 1, we can find the two numbers that add to the middle term and multiply to our last term. In this case, -3 and -3 add to -6 and multiply to this 9 right here. So those are going to be our two numbers that we have down here as well. And you notice this -3 and this -3 match this -3 down here and this -3 right here. Now this only works when a is equal to 1. So don't try this if a is not equal to 1. You can go find one of my other videos to work on one of those problems. But when a equals 1, we will always have the same numbers here when we split up as we do down here for these. And when these two parentheses are the same, we can write it as 1 parentheses to the power of 2.